we're going to be talking a little bit about ADFS. We have a special guest, Jim O'Hare. He's our Client Success Manager. He comes from Denver, so welcome to the podcast, Jim. Thank you for coming to the show and being part of our team and talking with us a little bit about ADFS. Let's jump right into it. This is a business development podcast. We want to talk about technology. We do another podcast, the personal development one. This one, we want to talk a little bit about technology, what's coming, what's changing with regards to Infor and some of the other technologies that we support here. Let's briefly talk a little bit about what is ADFS and why our clients being asked to migrate to ADFS.
Sure. ADFS, basically the acronym stands for Active Directory Federation Services, and it was a product that was designed by Microsoft to help applications with authentication, basically passing a username and password from the user entry, back to the application side.
So before they were using LDAP, and now they're being asked to use Active Directory Federation Services. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between LDAP and Active Directory, and then let's jump right into single token services and the reason why Infor is asking clients to migrate over. Can you briefly explain a little bit about the LDAP single token and how that worked and versus the new Active Directory Federation Services?
Sure. The single token service had limitations on the ability to allow the passing of the authentication piece to more than one application like LSO or Lawson Smart Office or Mingle, and with Infor building multiple applications that are dependent on a single token, they needed to have a more robust vehicle to pass that token between the multiple applications. So they're making use of a product. Microsoft saw the shortcomings of their current setup and came out with Active Directory Federation Services, and Infor is also taking advantage of that.
One of the things that I also want to mention is that we're a Microsoft certified partner. We help with a number of Microsoft products. Let's talk a little bit about the requirements. So I think also part of the requirement that was driving the migration to ADFS is that they're moving and pushing clients to the cloud, right? So the cloud, going from the cloud to an LDAP Active Directory authentication posed some limitation. You couldn't pass a lot of data, or you were limited to just the token itself. On the Active Directory Federation Services, you are able to do that across multiple applications on multiple servers, across different on-prem versus cloud and things like this. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe you're correct there. And the way I understand it, that the Microsoft folks allowed it to be a longer token, more involved, and that token was able to be imported and passed between more than one application.
Got it. So for our audience, let's explain a little bit of what is changing, right? Is security changing on LSF? Is security on Landmark changing? Is security on Cloud Suite changing for this Active Directory Federation Services implementation?
No, I don't think there's going to be any changes to security where the users would be able to determine that there's been a difference. This is all going to be in the background, and it's going to be a more streamlined approach, a little bit more performance improvement, so that your logon time will be faster, basically.
Got it. And what are some of the positives and negative pros and cons of going to ADFS versus staying on LDAP? And what are some of the versions that are required for ADFS, right? So at a certain version, if you're running LSF or Mingle or Landmark, you're asked to go to ADFS.
Right.
What are those, and can we talk a little bit about some of those?
Sure. The positives obviously would be the single sign-on. The users would not have to authenticate to Mingle, then to Smart Office, and then the Landmark. Once they've gotten past the authentication part, the rest is just authorization, and that's where your Lawson Security comes into play, Landmark Security, as well as LSF. So positives are pretty straightforward, but the negatives that I would list would be the patches that Lawson puts out. They are not going to offer patches for any versions after March, so in the past, March of this year, March 1st, for those older
LDAP.
LDS or LDAP and LS single token systems. So that's one negative that can't be overlooked. You know, they're going to push their customers to move forward. Now, as far as versions go, version 10 of the Lawson applications, you had to be, you could not go to 2012 server if you're on version 10 and you're only on ADFS 2.0. But if you are on version 10 and you are on 2012, the requirement was ADFS 3.0.
And now?
Yeah, and going forward in newer versions than version 10, version 11 would be 3.0 or 4.0 of ADFS.
And so, you have options? Can you go to a 3.0, 4.0? It sounds like you can run multiple, either one, right? 3 or 4, but we recommend 4.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you know, 5 is going to be coming out with from Microsoft, so I think Infor is basically just trying to pave the way for the version 4 folks, so that they don't have to, you know, create another, you know, Active Directory Federation services later and avoid that pitfall. So I would say 4 would be my option if I were to do it from scratch. Starting off, I would go right to 4. If the applications that you're running is ADFS 3.0 compatible, it'll be ADFS 4.0 compatible.
Let's talk about the effects of ADFS. You briefly mentioned that it's authentication, not authorization. Is any of the security roles or groups being passed over on the ADFS token? What's the effects, right? Is it authentication? Is it authorization? Is it groups? Can we talk some of the technical details?
Yeah.
And we don't have to get too technical, but just high level technical on what it's changing and things like this.
Sure. Nothing's changing as far as the roles or the Lawson security screens. So it's still passing authentication only, and it does not have any bearing on the authorization piece. The authorization piece is still handled within the Infor application after ADFS hands it off.
And why is authentication important? What is important about that component?
Well, there's a lot of hacking techniques out there, and one of them is man in the middle. So the authentication piece would be the handoff from the user's terminal all the way through to the application. And if there is any type of a man in the middle or any kind of, you know, where somebody could steal that session, you know, the ADFS has mitigated a lot of the
risk involved in the
risk.
LDAP component. And we briefly mentioned a little bit about for example, clients that are in the cloud and you have multiple applications. The ADFS component mitigates that risk involved with the Active Directory and the LDAP session. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct, and that is I think the main driving force behind the whole reason that Microsoft created ADFS.
How do clients make the switch? Some clients, we've actually talked to one client today where, you know, ADFS is not implemented at the organization. What do clients need to know? How is the impact of implementing ADFS for an organization, you know, mid-size scale? How is that important for them? How do they prepare for ADFS?
Yeah, good point, Israel. What we've been seeing whenever customers come to Cendien, and it seems to me that there's a lack of communication between Infor and the users, explaining to the users that they actually need to provision their own ADFS server on their network, wherever it may be, the customer-owned network where their infrastructure team manages it. Then that ADFS server has a certain configuration that is built on it that will talk to the cloud-based ADFS server that is hosted by Infor. And that's a very important piece to understand, is that there's Infor-owned ADFS server and customer-owned ADFS server. The infrastructure team on the customer side is responsible for all Microsoft patches and rebooting of that ADFS server. So, that the confusion I think is happening is because the customer doesn't realize that Infor is building an ADFS server for each and every customer in their Amazon cloud.
Infor Amazon Cloud.
Infor Amazon Cloud, yeah.
And the clients have to implement their own ADFS server on their network that talks to their Active Directory, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And if they don't have Active Directory or ADFS implemented at the organization, they have to start thinking about this early on because it's part of the requirements coming for upgrading their application.
Yeah, we've seen customers that were upset with when they realized that part of the project of going from a 2008 server system on the old LSF, the old LSF systems, version 10, when they want to go to 2012 server, the requirement for 2012 server is ADFS 2.0 if you're still on the version 10X, the newest of version 10.
10.09, I think, right?
Yeah. It's pretty much, it's going to be
a requirement.
Yeah, a requirement for if you're going to go to version 11, you're going to require ADFS. And if you're going to version 2012, it's going to require ADFS. So that was one of the reasons that a lot of customers don't realize. That's one of the reasons why Infor was not able to put them on 2012 servers, because that was a requirement that they would have had to have pushed onto the customer. So the customer
on the ADFS side.
Yeah, they would have
what does customer need to know? What can they expect? Is this something that could be implemented in a couple weeks? Is it a couple months? What is a typical time frame for a client that's mid-size healthcare organization? They got 2,000 employees. They are running Active Directory, but they have no application on ADFS yet. What can we tell them? How can they prepare for ADFS? And what are some of the things that they need to consider?
Okay, I believe the best way to describe this would be talk to your infrastructure team and ask them if they have ADFS already, and if ADFS already exists in your organization, it may just be as simple as them adding in the configuration that Infor provides. And that's in the best case scenario. But
worst case scenario is they have to implement ADFS altogether. It's something that they have to plan, and it requires some strategy sessions with the infrastructure team to plan and coordinate the project. Is that correct?
That's correct. And there's probably two paths to that. They have to implement a new ADFS server if they have ADFS already, because let's say they have ADFS 2.0 and they want to go to version 11 of the Infor applications.
They couldn't do it with a 2.0. They have to go to 3 or 4, correct?
Yeah, if they're going to go to version 11, they're going to need 3.0 or 4.0 to do that. And if they're going to stay on version 10, then it is possible that they could go to ADFS 2.0. Let's say if they already have 2.0 existing in their system. But eventually they're going to have to go to the higher version 3 or 4.
3 or 4,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so we're recommending 4 just to get that out of the way in the future, because you don't want to, it will bring down your application. If you stop the ADFS server, no one can log into the Infor applications, and that is something to be thought about.
They're on 3.0 and they want to implement ADFS for Infor. All it is just setting up the services component for the ADFS part for the Infor application.
Correct. Yeah, there's a configuration that they can add into an existing ADFS server that it wouldn't have any bearing on their current applications. They would just be adding the Infor.
A typical ADFS implementation project for a client that does not have ADFS now would involve a couple resources, couple month-long project. We sit down with them and map out their technology with the infrastructure team. Let's walk a little bit through some of that for our audience.
Yeah, the main thing to consider is the infrastructure team needs to provision that server, and it has to be the customer managed server, whereas Infor has their own Infor based server in the AWS cloud in addition to the customer server. So there's 2 ADFS servers that we're talking about. One's owned by Infor, one's owned by the customer.
Can they implement Windows 2012? Do they have to go to 2016, 2019?
2012 right now is the only recommended
Platform
OS version. If they're on 2012, it's ADFS 3.0 or greater. If they're on 2008, they must be on ADFS 2.0.
Got it.
That was the big problem where customers had to stay on 2008 if they were on a certain version of the Lawson applications.
Let's close the podcast with talking a little bit about the bottom line. What is the bottom line for the clients? If they're upgrading, they have to implement ADFS. Can they consider any other technologies?
Well, I guess you can, with the caveat that you would have to reach out to Infor and get their approval. But let's face it, ADFS is the future of authentication for all applications that are going to be Infor based. And I would suggest that a customer just face the facts that that's what they're going to have to go to.
And they have to start early, planning the stages early to get the project implemented and talk to the infrastructure team and get this.
It's not a lot of hours.
On your schedule.
Exactly. It's not a lot of hours for the customer to connect an ADFS server to the already existing ADFS server in the Amazon cloud. It's provisioned in the image. It's a standard server just waiting for some connection. That's not the problem. The problem is that the customer has to not only provision that server, but when they install ADFS, it's now going to start talking to their Active Directory. And it's on their network. And some customers may have a problem with the way it's communicating with their existing Active Directory, and they own that. They own that security umbrella or bubble, I guess you can call it. And that's the main thing, is that it's not connecting it to Infor's ADFS server is not so hard, but getting your infrastructure team on board, I think that's key.
That's going to be the key to getting the project implemented.
Yeah.
And ADFS, one of the things that we didn't mention is that whether you're on-prem, on cloud, single tenant, multi-tenant, you have to implement ADFS. So there's no, even if I'm on-prem, I still have to implement ADFS. Is that correct?
That's correct. In order for the LSF server to communicate with the Landmark server, even if you have LSF on-prem, that server has to pass certain information back and forth to the Landmark server, and the only way it's going to be able to do that is with ADFS. That's built into the application. So. And
this is just not for, this does not only apply to Infor, but it also applies to some of the other applications. Sharepoint is one of the ones you mentioned. Yeah,
SharePoint, I'm thinking Landmark, Mingle, just the GHR module that's in Landmark, obviously IPA, which is Infor Process Automation. Ion is a big one that's kind of a newer
technology
product.
Stack coming out.
Yeah, and I mean, Mingle, even if Mingle goes away, it's still going to have some role in the background. Our website, they can check out our website to get some more information on how to communicate through Cendien, and we provide the ADFS documentation that Infor gives to their customers. We can certainly provide that to any customer, and I think that's going to be, once you see the documents that is required, then you start to understand why it's so important that you must be on ADFS for going forward.
Definitely. Well, guys, we want to close with saying, we're an Infor delivery partner. If you need help with ADFS implementation, this is just a quick synopsis of what we can do, what's required, what's coming. Reach out to us. We're on social media, LinkedIn, YouTube, Vimeo, Twitter. Follow us, reach out to us on our content. Again, this is Israel Dennis with Jim O'Hare. Thank you for being part of our podcast.